Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the bunker. Welcome back to episode 3 of 4 on the Jersey Devil. And here we go. So in 1732, to just continue with our story here, Benjamin Franklin joins the almanac game. He is originally from Boston, and he began writing satirical works under an alias, and that alias was Poor Richard Saunders. The Poor Richard's Almanac would become the most famous almanac in American history, and it would come along to destroy his competition, which was the Leeds Almanac. Benjamin Franklin, he claimed to be friends with Titan Leeds, and claimed that Titan predicted his own death using astrology, which Mr. Franklin thought himself, his opinion was that astrology was utter nonsense. A lot of people were using it at this time. Astrological readings and so forth were showing up in different almanacs and in some books, and he felt that this was hogwash, and he didn't pass up an opportunity to troll someone who believed in astrology. The start of the Jersey Devil Legend, as a matter of fact, actually very, very roughly coincides, not that roughly, actually, coincides with the death of Titan Leeds, as well as with this whole Titan Leeds Benjamin Franklin rivalry. And what I'm going to do is start off reading. I'm reading the book. It's already written. I'll start reading on page 55, page 55 to page 56. From the Secret History of the Jersey Devil. Here we go. Franklin's use of the hoax against Titan Leeds had several purposes. It afforded him an opportunity to attack the credibility of the editor of his competition for almanac sales. But he also saw a chance to discredit those who, like Leeds, promoted astrology. Franklin wanted to make all astrologers look like fools. This being a frequent theme in some of his satirical writing, Benjamin Franklin had cast his rival almanac publisher as a ghost, a reanimated sorcerer who haunted his enemies. The traditional quote-unquote birth of the Jersey Devil coincides roughly with the death of Titan Leeds, as well as with the Franklin-Leeds Almanac War, as I just stated. Franklin continued these false stories and hoaxes until nearly a decade after Titan's death, when he wrote The Speech of Polly Baker. Upset with the way that mothers, but not fathers, found themselves on trial for having children out of wedlock, Franklin put the fictional Polly Baker on trial, where she gave a moving speech in her defense. This trial was her fifth for such an offense. She was poor, had no help, and received no sympathies from society or the courts. For Polly, pregnancy was a crime that pushed her to the margins of society, not unlike a witch. First published in the British Gentleman's Magazine for that year, it was published again in the Great Advertiser in April. In Franklin's story, the woman was not convicted, but ultimately persuaded one of the judges on the case to marry her. Many readers thought the story was actually genuine. Franklin didn't confess to this hoax until 1778. This fiction has similarities and themes that became part of the Leeds Devil Legend. The persecuted mother, absentee father, social shunning, etc., right? So this rivalry between Benjamin Franklin and Titan Leeds sort of gave fuel to this negative connotation to the Leeds name and the Leeds family, which is interesting because other than Daniel Leeds, Titan's father, going against the people who he felt betrayed them, which were the Quakers, he wasn't really someone who was out on the street committing crimes. He wasn't ripping people off. He just had a different opinion. He felt that astrology and the moving of the planets had an influence on things on Earth, among many other things that he disagreed with. But it's interesting how Benjamin Franklin sort of adds fuel to the fire of this anti-Leeds sentiment, and that the Leeds name being associated with something with negative connotations. Because, I mean, the Leeds family and Daniel Leeds' sons and grandsons, they went on to run businesses. They fought in the Revolution, some of them prominently so. They bought land around the area, and it's actually the Leeds family that were one of the first settlers in the area that is now Atlantic City, New Jersey. So they weren't bad people, but this negative connotation attached to the name of Leeds has basically everything to do with Benjamin Franklin. In the late 1740s, the Bradfords quit publishing the Leeds Almanac, at the time called the American Almanac, and it finally went out of business. The Leeds sons, though, and grandsons, continued careers. Like I said, they fought in the Revolution and settled Atlantic City. So they were not unproductive people. They weren't evil people. They weren't ripping people off and stealing. They weren't thieves. They were legitimate businessmen. They were soldiers. So there's no real good reason beyond this feud between Ben Franklin and Titan Leeds, which was preceded by the feud between Daniel Leeds, his father, and the Quakers, who were a very prominent group of people back in those days in this area of the country. Post-Revolution, immigration picked up. So many other people, many more people came to the New World seeking opportunity and business. And as more Europeans arrived, the more traveled west into new territories. And here you have this vast wilderness, which was North America at the time, that many of these Europeans were coming to. And it was a stark contrast to the area of the world they were coming from, because London and the vast majority of England itself had been settled, was tamed, was being farmed. There were no blank spots on the map, as it were, in England, right? But many people from England came to the New World, and beyond these 13 colonies are just seemingly at the time, I'm sure, infinite miles and kilometers and acres of unknown land, unknown forests. You know, Native Americans living out there who seem to kind of just blend into their surroundings and just to pop up and raid you, or you know, if you're good enough to be friends with them, you learn a lot from them. So there's this, you know, simultaneously there's this melting pot of Europeans flooding into the New World, mixing with some peaceful Native Americans, some butting heads with Native Americans, but their legends bleed into the society that was pouring into the New World. It's just inevitable. And it's just interesting that the nature spirit of the Lenape was often seen as a horse-like figure with bat wings, which sounds familiar. I mean, you're thinking of the Jersey Devil. But he would also be seen as, you know, a deer or an elk with an individual riding him. That's another motif that may not be as intimidating as the one the flying deer bat thing with, someone riding on him. So, but it's just interesting how people flooding into the New World sort of took on some of the legends, brought some legends with them, and how that all sort of mixed together. Just, the concept of the forest, dangerous forest, the unknown, was something it was something that the English brought with them and what Europeans brought with them. Those legends are pretty universal. But this new land and all these unknowns just sort of help to fuel the fear and the anxiety of traveling out into the wilderness, because it was very, very dangerous. You had Native Americans, you had bears, you had all these different animals, like large cats and everything that England did not have. And so coming to America became this magical place, but at the same time was scary and magical, right? In early America, there are many stories of giants that were found and ended up, stories ended up in the newspaper about those things. Were they real? Were they sensationalized? Were they exaggerated? We're not sure, but my point is the stories were out there. And at one point, actually, when a moose was discovered in the New World, the remains were actually sent back to England. And most people in England thought that that was a hoax, because they couldn't possibly imagine a deer-like creature the size of a moose. So they thought it was, many people thought at the time it was fake. And who wouldn't if you'd never seen one in real life? These things are massive. If you've never seen a moose in person, holy shit. It is very intimidating how big and strong these creatures are. It is absolutely just, it's amazing. So I don't blame these individuals in England who saw just remains of something and just thought, oh, that's fake. Because, we do this now with dinosaurs. Like, dinosaur bones are fake, a lot of people say, right? Because you've never seen one alive running around. So if you saw the remains of a moose and you had never seen or heard of a moose before, you would be like, what in the hell is this? Early in America around this time, the Philadelphia Museum of Natural History began displaying dinosaur bones found in the Northeast. And as a matter of fact, there was, I think, approximately a third of a dinosaur skeleton was found not far from here in Haddonfield, New Jersey, not far from Burlington. There was a story around this time also of a sea monster, kind of a creature that in description sounds a lot like the Loch Ness Monster or Nessie. An important thing to keep in mind too around this time in early America is practical jokes were very big. Punking someone in a paper was very popular, because it was very, very early on. Newspaper publishers in England as well, and this is something that came with them, they realized that if you wrote a sensational story, if you exaggerated, if you made it funny, if you made it entertaining, even if there was a kernel of truth in there, if you exaggerated it and made it bigger, it would sell more papers and you would make more money. So a newspaper being a business, you want to sell papers, you will, when you can, exaggerate a story, for sure. It was during the 1830s and 1840s that stories of giants began to make local newspapers. And this was also around the same time that individuals like P.T. Barnum began purchasing or renting such finds and putting them on display in order to bring more people to the circus and the fair, sell more tickets, make more money. It's the oldest hustle in the book. And P.T. Barnum was an individual that jumped on this early on and to great effect, made a lot of money, made a great living. And because he did, many other individuals in the same sort of field also tried this same technique in order to make money. There's one display that P.T. Barnum put on, and that was his what he called his Fiji mermaid. And this display, unfortunately, was actually destroyed in a fire. But Barnum actually recreated a new one that was as close as possible to the original. So now what the original one was, we don't know. Probably some sort of fish or unknown sea creature. But maybe he was something, several different skeletons of things that were put together to look like something interesting. We'll never know because that was destroyed. But he did recreate that in order to keep the business going and keep selling tickets. So I'm going to read here from the book about the quote-unquote Devil Kid. From the book, page 71. Here we go. While the popularity of runaway nuns, giants, and strange fossil animals show an enthusiasm for the bizarre in American culture, one hoax in particular bore an eerie resemblance to the Jersey Devil. In the late 1880s, reports began to circulate around Cleveland, Ohio, of a curious birth dubbed the Devil Kid. It was reputedly born to a Polish family in a working-class neighborhood in Newburgh, Ohio. It carried a number of the same frightening characteristics later associated with the Jersey Devil. Reddish skin, horns, claws, and hooves, and a long pointy tail. The story also fed into anti-immigrant sentiment. The Devil Kid even had its own catchphrase, whereas Mother Leeds had yelped, "Oh, let this one be a devil," as she delivered the creature. The attending doctor in the Devil Kid story blurted out, "Great God, but we must kill the thing." News reports referred to this monstrosity as Satan's incarnate. After creating a stir, there was not much more for the Devil Kid to do, so newspapers killed it off after a relatively short lifespan. Unlike the creature of the Pine Barrens, the Devil Kid, a more urban version, did not haunt the woods attacking people. The body of the Devil Kid, however, circulated in traveling displays for a time across Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New York. It would have been known by the Philadelphia newspapermen who cobbled together the Jersey Devil story. Parading the bodies of monsters such as the Devil Kid occurred quite often and proved popular with the public, further supporting the idea that such creatures did actually exist. Closer to home, in December 1885, Elizabeth, New Jersey found itself plagued by an ominous ghost-like creature. Reported over 12 feet tall, this otherworldly being had glowing eyes and horns. It had the capability to lunge over tall fences, run up the sides of buildings, and flit through the tops of trees. Noiseless, it pursued women in an attempt to embrace and kiss them, referred to as Spring-Heeled Jack for its climbing and jumping abilities. The creature genuinely frightened people. It seemed to frequent St. Michael's Church on East Jersey Street. The name Spring-Heeled Jack first appeared in Victorian London as a monster of a frightening devil-like creature that accosted and assaulted pedestrians in that great city. The year before, stories about the British Spring-Heeled Jack appeared in newspapers from New York to Kansas to Montana. It became very well known in America. Terrible, almost supernatural assailants seemed to be everywhere during the late 19th century. Starting with Jack the Ripper in London, a Jack the Cutter terrorized Philadelphia, attacking women in 1899. He would sneak up on them and then slash their clothes. Across America, one would find Jack the Kisser, Jack the Hugger, and Jack the Stone Thrower. Newspapers in the Middle Atlantic region carried reports of all these activities. When the Leeds Devil morphed into the Jersey Devil, it did not do so as an isolated event, but as part of a well-established tradition. It did not walk alone, but in the company of a versatile parade of strange villains. So as the 1800s progressed towards the 1900s, the Pine Barrens as an area began to sort of fade from focus of society. When the first Europeans arrived up until post-revolution, before the Civil War, there were many towns in the Pine Barrens that began to decline. Some were saved by the Civil War, unfortunately, because there were iron mills and factories and so forth that were needed during times of war. But after those things were gone, after the Revolution and certainly after the Civil War, many, many towns in the Pine Barrens became ghost towns, literally. The focus of everyone's or most people's attention in the New World, in America at that time, turned to the major cities where the Industrial Revolution began happening: New York, Philadelphia, Newark, Baltimore, and into the city centrals, and most people's focus didn't land on areas like the Pine Barrens. People that lived there became considered backwoods, bumpkins, what is referred to this day as pineys. I know some pineys myself personally. I grew up not far from the old border of the original Pine Barrens in Ocean County. But because the focus of most people became focused on the cities, this huge area of the Pine Barrens once again becomes this mysterious place out there, this mysterious woodland, not inhabited or barely inhabited by people. So then it once again becomes that scary, unknown place where people don't go. At this point, though, Atlantic City is now bustling. Baltimore is bustling. There's travel in between. So people would travel, through the Pine Barrens. But there were very few people that lived there. And so once again, it becomes this unknown, spooky X factor. It's this unknown place that you travel through it, but you want to get through it as quickly as possible because it's creepy. It's, these legends still persist in people's minds, generation after generation. These stories are told to children, to children, to children, and those things are passed along. 1884 was a pretty critical year. While Spring Hill Jack is assaulting people in Elizabeth, New Jersey, there was an African-American church who claimed to have seen the devil himself. This was followed up by an 1893 story of a railroad worker on the Erie Railroad who claimed to have seen the quote-unquote Leeds Devil. He claimed that it actually had the face of an ape or a monkey, but it also had wings. An additional claim in the story is that the creature came out of Evesham Woods, which it's believed the creature was not seen in that area for about 100 years. And the legend goes, not sure where this originated from, but the legend goes that there was a blessing put on the land by some ministers that seemed to keep this thing, whatever it is, at bay for 100 years. And that was done in the 1790s. And so now in the 1890s, this blessing has now worn off. Now the creature is back. That's the legend. There was an article that stated also that the devil's appearance was the fault of a man named Leeds and his demonic wife, who cursed her child and also her marriage. So these stories just keep getting fed just enough to keep them going. Just enough to keep this legend going. And next time someone sees something weird or has a weird experience in this area, it gets attributed to this devil, and then it just goes and continues, and the momentum keeps going, right? In 1899, there was another story that surfaced, was a sighting by two men in the forest, and this article also drew on this element of this 100-year banishment aspect and this 100-year blessing that had just worn off. And this was perfect narrative-wise because that would explain this long period where none of these sightings supposedly happened, right? In 1903, Charles Skinner wrote American Myths and Legends and described the Leeds Devil as a story fallen from favor, but he was describing it in this way, but again, he was bringing it up, writing another article about it, and so therefore keeping the momentum going and keeping the story going, keeping the story of this Leeds Devil, the Jersey Devil, in the minds of people, and so therefore keeping the legend going. It's interesting. He also claimed that a woman named Leeds was a Quaker woman in appearance, but was a devil in disguise, and that a clergyman with a candle, book, and a bell banished the devil for 100 years. Soon after Skinner's work, which was in 1903, this story again makes a huge comeback, thanks to a Trenton Times article, newspaper I've read many, many times growing up, from 1905. The author of the story puts the birth of the Leeds Devil at the corner of Farnsworth Avenue and McKnight's Alley in Bordentown. This version of the story only includes Captain Leeds and his demonic wife, but not the other 12 children, not the 13th child, not all that part of the narrative. So the story keeps popping up with slightly different variations to it. So now, shortly after that, in the winter of the same year, 1905, there's a story of strange footprints that showed up in the Pine Barrens. And these footprints allegedly were also seen going across rooftops that some people reported. And then again in early 1809, so just a few years later, articles began springing up in Philadelphia papers of strange hoof-like oh my God, I'm going to get this out. Strange hoof-like footprints in the snow around Bordentown and Mount Holly, and also Leeds Point. So it seems that this story sort of has come and go in different waves. That in the early 1900s, for whatever reason, is another wave coming, and newspaper articles are written. There's actually even the area of South Jersey and around this area of Mount Holly, Bordentown, was put on kind of a high alert because of some of these stories and these strange footprints that were seen. And there were posses that were assembled. People went out on hunting groups trying to find this thing. And there were some people that took advantage of this to, again, come up with their own version of the story to keep things going. But we'll get into that on the next episode of The Bunker. And I want to thank everyone for joining us for another exciting episode of The Bunker.